And the first speaker that will kick it off tonight is Manaz Farr. So now I'll just pass it off to Manaz and feel free to take it away.
Thanks so much, Emily. Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all well and all keeping safe. My name is Manaz Farr, like flower. My pronouns are she and her. And I am, as was pointed out, an assistant director for Ernst & Young's Canada Strategic Pursuits team. So what you may be wondering is what that mouthful even means. My job effectively falls at this really cool intersection of helping teams basically put their best foot forward to help our clients in government do their best work. So the teams that I work with are generally consulting teams. They come together effectively to answer to a response to an RFP, a request for proposal, or some sort of strategy piece where the government is thinking, you know, we want to replace a particular system, or we want to bring a new capability into government to really help our citizens, you know, access services or things like that. So my job really is to come in as a bit of a SWAT team to help them strategize and figure out what the client is actually looking for, what they're willing to buy, and then how we can bridge that gap. So I have 3 key skills in this area. One is around strategy, again, strategizing. What does the right team look like for these people? What do they value with the people that they're going to be working day to day on? The other is writing. So I minored in English at SFU as well with a major in psychology, and writing has been an integral part of my job and basically my entire career trajectory. So you know, that piece is really helping them to craft a response to a request for proposal that's really going to resonate with what the client is looking for, right? Whether it's pulling in the emotional or the intellectual pieces to really sort of drive that process. And the third really is around just being an avid communicator, right? We're doing work for governments that are ranging from putting in artificial intelligence into government services to better help citizens access services, to really helping them change their culture to address things like diversity and inclusion and what that looks like, to even just managing how do I invoice internally for a tax service, right? So the range of services that our firm brings is really, really broad, which means that my days are never boring, basically. And there's a real spark in working in an environment like that. Why psychology? I guess really it was my curiosity about people, right? My focus in psychology was really around intergroup relations. So how groups of people sort of react with each other, how they respond to each other. And that obviously has become a really critical part of us as a society as we face some of these big and complex challenges that come from living in close quarters, but being so different. And having moved here from East Africa as a child, there was a cultural piece to it for me as well, where I didn't quite understand Canadian culture, who was in, who was out, why, and how that impacted my life, right? And growing up, that was really the piece that I wanted to kind of try and sort out. So like most people who would have gone into psychology early on, and I'm saying early because this was almost 20 years ago that I was at SFU, you know, I knew that there was one career trajectory, and that was to become a counselor or to become a psychologist. And I didn't know much more than that. I just knew that I wanted to work with people. When I got to school, I discovered that there was so much more to it than I had originally thought, and that maybe the psychology piece didn't fit quite the way that I thought it would, which left me a little bit sort of rudderless, right? You get to the end of your degree and you're a little bit like, well, now I don't know what to do. Like, do I do more school? Do I go work somewhere? And I ended up working for a nonprofit that provided media training to citizens abroad. So we'd be training journalists in war-torn countries, and that gave me a completely different perspective on what was possible when you work with groups of people, and led me to then get a degree in international studies, again at SFU. So all of that to say, you know, my career trajectory, psychology has been so central to who I am and what I've been able to really bring forward to a career that I really enjoy doing right now. And that nothing that I've learned in psychology has actually ever been wasted, because I use it every single day. It may not be the statistics classes that I took necessarily, and that's probably a good thing, but everything that you learn about people, and really all of the different facets that make our organizations work are so important, especially now that technology has become such a great part of our lives, right? So there's a whole section and a whole sort of reckoning around ethics and what that looks like with human and machine interactions. And I'm lucky to work for an organization that really takes some of those things into account when we're planning big projects that are going to impact a lot of people. In terms of career tips, really, you know, I think journey has been a bit unorthodox, and I find that a lot of career pursuit strategists like myself have sort of fallen into the work. I ended up as a pursuit coordinator through a contact of mine when I was volunteering at TEDx SFU. And so again, SFU played a big part in me actually finding my career again in a completely different way. And so I think my career tips again are really just to stay open to a lot of the opportunities that may not look like what you think they ought to look like. And really to go and explore those, right? I think early on in life, we're kind of taught to, you know, you've got to pick a career path, and then you've got to pick a degree, and then you've got to do this for 50 years until you retire. And that's just not a reality for a lot of people anymore. And it's okay to branch out, and it's okay to take breaks, and it's okay to continue to reevaluate what you're doing if you don't enjoy it, you know, or you enjoy a certain piece of it, to really go and dig in and see what that looks like for you. Another one is just take advantage of volunteer opportunities. And I don't like to necessarily tell people to follow their passions, because I'm passionate about gardening, but I don't think I would want to do it as a career. So find something that you enjoy, find something that really brings you to life every day, and really take the opportunity to volunteer for things that you're passionate about, whether it's one of the SFU, the many groups that they have there, whether it's an arts and culture organization or sports, it doesn't really matter, but some of the best networking that you can ever do comes out of those opportunities. And psychology is such a complex and beautiful thing. You know, I like to think of careers like human brains, right? There's parts of them that we develop and skills that are pretty foundational to who we are. And then your brain does beautiful things all the time, right? It explores all sorts of imaginative opportunities, and really your life path is going to be very much like that. So it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be uncertain, but don't let that stop you from really truly digging in and finding something that you're going to love in the end. And that's me in a nutshell.
Great, thanks so much, Manaz. And I totally echo your sentiments, especially about volunteering. Like, not only do we get such great experiences and skills from that, but a lot of my lifelong friends that I've made were through SFU volunteering. So I totally agree with you on what you mentioned there. So thanks so much, Manaz. And now we are just going to move on to the second speaker. I'm just going to pass it on to Bernard, who will present next.
Thank you. Apologies in advance. My boys just came home, and I'm just trying to find a spot that isn't too loud that also has enough light. So I'm on my iPad, so I might be moving a little bit here and there. But happy to be here. I guess that's just kind of part of the pandemic life. I think I've taken a Zoom call in every single room in my 1,000 square foot apartment that we live in, including the bathrooms, and they have really awesome acoustics. But right now I had to move because they're taking a bath. Just came home from daycare at SFU, coincidentally. So like I said, my name is Bernard Ryu. My pronouns are he, him. I am the Back on Track program manager. Some of you may have heard of the Back on Track program. Basically, it's a retention program for SFU for undergraduate students. So really, what we primarily do is help students out when they are in academic difficulty. So when they're struggling with their academics, when they're on the verge of being required to withdraw, Back on Track is one of the options that students can opt for. And, you know, I won't go into too much detail about the job itself, but basically, I find it really rewarding because there's a lot of different reasons why students fall into kind of academic difficulty. Of course, it could just be that you're partying a little too hard or playing a little too many video games or whatever your vice is. But there are also life, right? And I think if anything, the last year and a bit has taught us, sometimes there are things just completely outside of our control. And I know sometimes students come to our program because of that. And it can be incredibly rewarding when we're able to help those students get that second chance. So I've been at SFU since 2000, and I never thought I would be still here 21, 22 years later. That was not the plan. So to give you a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from, when I first came to SFU back in 2000, I wanted to do a degree in business. And to be quite frank, SFU was not even my first choice school. I wanted to go to either Queens or maybe UBC. I know it's hard to speak of the other school right now, but you know, there are a lot of other schools that I wanted to go into. And SFU was actually not my first choice, but circumstances and life and my parents, and there's a lot of things that I had to do as the firstborn in my family. So I kind of landed here. Still happy, of course, great institution, but wasn't the start that I was hoping for. But the business part was pretty strong, even ever since I could remember, really, because my dad was always an entrepreneur, and it was kind of one of those things, right? I had to follow in his footsteps. I didn't really give it too much thought, but even, you know, in my late teens and early 20s, I felt like I had to be an entrepreneur. So that was something that I was following. I did party a little too hard when I was an undergrad. So I did not have the GPA to get into BD, or it wasn't called BD back then. And when I realized that I couldn't go into business, one of the other things that I automatically thought about was econ. And of course, a lot of folks go, if you can't get into business, what do? You do economics. Well, they're very different areas of study. There's a reason why they're in two different faculties and they're two different programs. Long story short, didn't really enjoy econ that much either. And I was quite lost for a bit, especially in the middle half of the 8 years that I was at SFU. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And psych was one of those things that I was always interested in, but I always wondered what I would do with a degree in psychology, right? And I couldn't really find an answer other than be a counselor, right? So I kind of avoided it, even though I was interested in it. And I finally took a course in intro psych. I actually didn't do that well in Psych 100, but did well enough that I passed. And I really enjoyed the course content. So I thought, you know what, I might give this a little bit of more time. And I did, and I really enjoyed it. So my grades eventually did improve. I was able to still graduate. And my focus in psychology that I found most interesting was in social and developmental psychology. So even after getting my degree, after 8 long years, and there was a lot of gaps in between where I traveled, where I worked full-time and multiple jobs, I was still focused on going into fields like accounting, marketing, maybe international trade. And a lot of my background in my job experience was in those areas. And then, of course, I graduated in 2008. And I think there's at least one other person on the panel who graduated in 2008. And if anybody remembers what happened then, it's kind of I guess, what's happening right now. The economy was not doing so hot, right? It was this, right after the subprime mortgage and the stock market crashed that summer. And I still remember finishing up that summer term looking at the news, wondering what the heck am I going to do? Because everybody was talking about how folks were losing homes, losing jobs, and just the world was not in a good place. So I actually had a couple job offers on the table, actually, thinking back that summer. So I thought I was doing pretty good. I was proactive. I was working with my networks to try and find a job. And of course, before the summer's out, all those offers are off the table. So I remember there was this salient moment that has burned into my memory. I was living right by Lohid Mall at the time with my brother. And in our rental unit, I remember opening my fridge and looking inside the fridge and seeing basically no food in there, almost like a Hollywood movie, like literally ketchup and pickles kind of thing. And I remembered really struggling to find a job. So I was kind of desperate for jobs. So what did I do? I applied to SFU in the temp pool because that's what I knew. And my wife was kind of in the same spot. So she recommended some different things. I think I'm smart enough to listen to my better half, and I was able to land a job relatively quickly at SFU. But I had no plans of working in post-secondary, and I had no plans working as a clerical kind of administrative support staff, especially in a unionized environment, because I was thinking, downtown, big glass windows, some kind of job that makes me work 12, 14 hours a day and just living that life, right? Suit up and go to downtown. And that's not what happened for about a year plus. And then I landed in student services, and I actually really started enjoying what I do. And that's when I landed in Back on Track. So I'm the program manager now, but when I started, I was a temp program assistant. And my boss at the time saw something in me and said, "Hey, do you want to stick around? And I might offer you a continuing gig." And at the time, honestly, I only said yes because I needed a little bit of stability in my life. I was thinking about saving up some money so that maybe I can go back to school, whether that's trade school or something, right? BCIT, one of the colleges, I don't know, but I needed something, and I knew the job market was not doing well. And then after all of that, a little bit of time passed, and that same boss asked, "Hey, do you want to become an academic advisor?" And I said yes, again, partly because I enjoyed the work, but partly because I needed the money and the stability. And the funny thing that happened, and I've worked in this unit for over 10 years, a lot of counseling and helping professions and people who are drawn to those professions, like social work or what have you, oftentimes are drawn to academic advising as well. It's not the same thing, but I think you're still helping people, you're still advising people. And I have coworkers that are kind of in that mindset, that are interested in those kind of areas. And that's what really resonated with me. And I think that's what really pulled me into psychology in the beginning. So I've been kind of doing various different jobs within the team. But eventually, obviously, I made it into the program manager role now. In terms of some advice, I think embracing kind of the chaos. I know the career folks at SFU use the chaos theory as one of their key principles that they go after. And there's a book. Hopefully, this book is still relevant. But there's a book called Johnny Bunko, and I know it's in the library because we use it in the Back on Track program. It's a comic book. It literally takes like 20 minutes to read. I'm a huge fan of it because a lot of what I went through, Johnny Bunko went through as well. And I just think there's a lot of really good lessons in there. So especially in the world that we find ourselves in, I think embracing some of that chaos, trying to get comfortable with what's uncomfortable and trying to look for opportunities and being open, I think is really important. And if there's anything that I've learned over the years, obviously what you do for a living matters, but who you do it with matters more in some ways. So I know a lot of the times focus is on what am I going to do next, but I would also think about who are my people, like who do I want to be with? You're going to be spending so much time in your career with your coworkers, right? So you want to make sure that your coworkers are your people, that people you can get along with, that they can see eye to eye with you. So that's something that I would give as advice. And final thing I'll leave you with, I met my wife, my beautiful wife at SFU in a psych class. I believe it was Rebecca Cobb's 3-something, interpersonal relations, the one about dating and falling in love. Thank you. I don't know if it was Dr. Cobb, but I remember at the beginning of the term, it was a summer term too. My wife and I were starting to eye each other up and down. And it was about infatuation and falling in love. And then of course we started dating halfway through the term. And by the time it was finishing, they were talking about why you get divorced and why you fall in love. So I think it prepared us well for our marriage. So I'll leave you guys with that. Thank you.
Wow, that's such a cute story. Thanks, Bernard. I've known Bernard for a while too. We used to work together in student services, and I totally agree with you about being open. I think that's super important, especially right now. So thank you, Bernard, for that. Now we'll move on to the third speaker, Shaleema Cambridge. I'll pass it on to you, Shaleema. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Emily. And I just want to say, Bernard, I also met my husband in a psych class too at SFU. So it seems to bring people together. So hi, everyone. My name is Shaleema Cambridge. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am zooming in from the traditional unceded territory of the Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Kwantlen First Nations. I currently hold 2 roles. So my primary role is with Fraser Health as a client partner in people development. And this consists of leadership development, working with both the clinical leaders as well as administrative leaders. I coach, I present workshops and trainings. I also support different departments in organizational development. So sometimes they may have conflicts that arise along their teams. They need to learn how to work better together. And so I help them figure out what type of training could help them move through that type of conflict. I also help support leaders in developing their own skills. So Fraser Health is one of the largest health authorities in BC. And there's many different departments, leaders, and layers of people within there. And so we can't do everything. We need to make sure that our leaders are equipped to actually do that and support their teams. And so a huge part of my job is actually passing on that leadership training, those leadership skills to others so that they can feel confident in leading their teams. My other role is working with a company called HRX. And so they're a consulting company that focuses specifically on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so we do a variety of trainings and workshops. I've had the pleasure to actually work with SFU in many different ways around our trainings and workshops. And this has grown out of work we did in understanding how EDI is manifested within organizations. So we do assessments and consulting, provide recommendations so that we can see the full lay of the land when it comes to equity, diversity in an organization. From there, we saw that while we provide recommendations, they need things. So they need training to actually learn about how they can do things differently. And so we also provide that. And a huge foundational piece of what we do lies in data and analytics. One of the things that I believe is what gets measured gets done. And so if you can measure it, then you actually can set those goalposts to achieve what it is that you want. And then you can look back and either pat yourself on the back because you've done that, or decide where you need to actually continue making improvements and actually work towards that, hold yourself accountable. So with that work, a lot of my time is taken up with focus groups, individual interviews to understand the experiences of employees within organizations. I also do that in preparation for workshops, and not even just consulting or assessment requirements, but also just our workshops as well, so we can understand how we tailor our workshops to different groups. And then another piece of that is actually doing that analysis of data that we collect and reporting that back to organizations. Within that, I may coach leaders on how to be more inclusive leaders, and it requires lots of listening, lots of being non-judgmental, and creating safe, open space for people to talk and share their experiences. So the reason I came into psychology at SFU was because truthfully, I thought that I had to be a doctor to live up to my parents' expectations. And I quickly realized that that was not going to be my route. And I thought, coming into it, I thought that, well, if I go into psychology, I could learn about people, I could become a psychologist, they'll be so happy for me. And while I enjoyed learning about people, it wasn't my route to become a doctor of any sort. What I found was that I loved communication. and I loved writing. I actually did the creative writing certificate while I was at SFU as well. And I realized that the more that I understood about people and about how others worked, our relationships, how we interact and engage, the more honest my stories could be, the more real they could be, and the more I could write to connect with others. And that really led me to wanting to branch out into marketing and communications work. So while I was going to SFU, I actually worked at TD. At that time it was TD Canada Trust, depending on the time that it was, my whole time. So for the majority of my degree, I worked there part-time. And so I had in my head that I would end up working in head office at TD, doing marketing, communications work, and that was my dream. And so I held on to that part-time job my whole way through with hopes of being able to get into that work after I graduated. I also found out that TD's head office is not in Vancouver, like many, many financial institutions. And I really wasn't willing to move to Toronto. We have a very small family that's all immigrated only here. And so I wanted to stay here. And like Bernard, I met my husband here, and so we wanted to stay here. And so I took another route, and I found a nonprofit organization that I was able to work in prior to me graduating to learn more about marketing communications and be able to apply those skills and really delve into it. I found that I was really worried about how my psych degree would translate into this field, but what was really interesting is that actually throughout my career in marketing communications, most of my managers and superiors have had a psych degree. So there's something there with marketing communications and psychology, absolutely. And I would say that most of us have also expressed that same kind of imposter syndrome about not feeling like we're living up to what was required in that field, but clearly we have something valuable to offer. So I probably stayed about a decade in marketing communications, and I did end up working in financial services. So my most recent position in that area was with HSBC, whose head office is in Vancouver, BC, one of the only banks that's located here, which is great. And so I was able to develop those skills and really develop my own leadership in that space as well. And one of the things that I found while doing that was that I wanted to actually start developing other people's leadership. I saw a huge opportunity for people to see their own leadership and develop their skills and see their strengths, just like I did in transferring over into a different field than I thought I would be in. And so during a mat leave, I did a bunch of training. I did a coaching certificate. I actually did the career development practitioner program through SFU. And I started learning about adult education. And when I left my mat leave, I was able to transition into a leadership development company that focused solely on leadership and communication. So I started doing coaching with them, training different organizations, was able to touch a bunch of different organizations in public sector, private sector, and the nonprofit world. And that led me to now working at Fraser Health in this role where I get to do almost come full circle when it comes to psychology and actually apply both psychology and leadership to the work I do. So for my tips for students, I would say simply be open to possibilities. When you can, say yes to new things, especially if they're interesting but might fall outside of your pre-plans or the plans that others have laid for you. Take calculated risks, especially when it has an opportunity to learn. And I would say live while going to school. So don't only focus on school, do volunteer work, have a part-time job if you could handle it. Make sure that you're getting experiences because those are the things that are going to make you job ready when you do leave school. And then the last thing I would say is really just diversify your networks. There's so many jobs that I'm still continuing to learn about in my old age that I never would have known of unless I met people who do those jobs or can talk to people who have exposure to those. So the more you could diversify those networks, the more you can learn about the possibilities for you. So thank you all.
Great, thanks so much, Shaleema, and I totally agree with you, especially about you said using psychology to understand people and also broadening your network. I feel like even things like social media marketing wasn't a thing 20 years ago. So if there's new jobs being created that we don't know about, and we can discover that by talking to people, right? So thanks so much, Shaleema, for that. Moving on to our fourth speaker, we have Myra Raymond. So feel free to take it away, Myra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Myra, and I work as an investment associate at Canaccord Genuity. I hope you're all well and glad you're able to make it here today. I wish when I was an undergrad, I participated in events like this and got more of an insight, exposure, and knowledge that there's so much you can do with an undergrad degree in psychology. When I started SFU, I started with the intent to graduate as a business major, but within my first few semesters, I hated it immensely. It affected my grades and quality of life. So I made the decision to follow my passion, which was psychology, in my second year. But when I made the switch, I received so many comments from people saying, what are you going to do with an undergrad in psychology? Or there's not much you can do with an undergrad in psychology. But I'm so glad that I ignored all the background noise and stuck to it. Throughout my university life, I kept an open mind and explored different career options as I never really knew what my end career goal was. I somewhat decided to go into HR just because that's the most common career that you hear in psychology that's linked to business. And at that time, I never thought working in the investment industry was even an option. It seemed like such a far-fetched idea, like you never hear about that. But in reality, it isn't at all. When you work in the investment industry, one of the main things that you do is you work with people. You build a clientele who trusts you enough to give you their money, their life savings to invest. Not only are you working with these people to meet their investment goals, but you invest their money in a way that suits them. Before getting into this industry, I never heard about the term the psychology of investing, but it makes so much sense. It takes different types of people to buy different types of holdings out there in the market. There are people that want to take risks and there's people that don't. So everyone's investment portfolio looks different. To those who may be wondering how I got into this industry, during my last semester of my undergrad, I wanted to get some experience to get my foot in to the door in an office setting. So I applied for a bunch of entry-level positions in all sorts of fields out there. So I was hired at first at National Bank Financial, which is another wealth management firm. And at first, it was just supposed to be a part-time data entry clerk position, which I was happy to accept. But the same week that I was being hired for that, someone else was leaving, and it was an administrative assistant position. And I was just taking one online course at that time. It was my last course at SFU, and they offered me the role. So I was able to work full time, which worked out great. Initially, this job was just going to be temporary since I just wanted to get my foot in the door. But the longer I stayed, the more I fell in love with it. So I continued staying in it. And I took courses at the Canadian Securities Institute. So if someone's interested in finance or the investment industry, you should definitely look at the Canadian Securities Institute online and see there's a bunch of different courses that you can take that can help you get into these kind of positions. So with my education at the Canadian Securities Institute, I got my CSC and my CPH designation, which now has allowed me to work as a licensed investment associate. So you see, to all those people that once told me what I would do with a psych undergrad degree, the options are limitless. Always keep your options open, be willing to try new things, since you may actually enjoy something you never thought of doing. Thank you.